So, hi, my name is Joelle Ray Arp Dunham, and I have the great pleasure to interview Dr. Sharon Carnicke today. Sharon is an expert a nationally acclaimed expert in Stanislavski and a master teacher of his last rehearsal technique, active analysis. Her acting expertise, along with her fluency and PhD in Russian language, informs all of her groundbreaking research and practice. Founder of the Stanislavski Institute for the 21st Century, she has taught active analysis in many corners of the world and is currently a professor at the University of Southern California. So, as an author, she is probably best known for her work, Stanislavski in Focus, which I have used extensively, as have many, many other practitioners and scholars alike. She also has a book on acting in film, co authored. And then she has a couple of chapters in the book Actors Training, which I have used extensively as well. One of them on Maria Knebel, who we will talk about in a little bit. And she'll be the main focus of our topic today. So thank you so much, Sharon, for agreeing to this interview and for meeting with me today.
Thank you. It's great to see you again.
It's been a pleasure.
And Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you as well. And so can you start by telling us a little bit about how you got into this work?
Yes, I think I would say a couple of things. First of all, my passion has always been acting since I was a kid, and I actually performed professionally when I was 12. So I really didn't know where my life was going to go. But when I got to college, I thought, oh my goodness, acting is a tough profession to make a living. And so I thought I'd study something more lucrative, maybe. And I had a foreign language requirement. It took me to Russian. I thought it would be fun to learn a different alphabet. And I thought I might become an interpreter. And so that was the beginning and the end of my giving up of acting, because as I worked with Russian, fell in love with the culture, fell in love with the literature, I realized that all my acting teachers in New York really did not have a grasp on what I was seeing when I read Stanislavski in Russian. So the first act of my saga, if you will, is becoming a detective. Why were the originally published books so different and so much shorter and so much had such a different tone than the books that I was reading in Russian? And so I was able to go back to theater through Russian. And I think what I would like to say at the outset about the journey, the lucky journey that I've had, is that in pursuing a PhD in Russian and returning to the theater and continuing to act and being concerned about actor training, I feel that it has become my real mission to break down the barrier between scholarship on acting, which I am absolutely committed to. I always want my students to know where a technique comes from, its history, why it was developed, who developed it, and meld that with the actual creative work of the actor. So for me, it's become a kind of mission. Clean, clear, real scholarship on the history of acting melded with real creative work as an actor in the workaday world of the theater. So this is what has taken me largely to Stanislavski. Initially, when I started working with Russian theater, I was really interested in the avant-garde and thought that my first real study would be on everything but Stanislavski. Mm-hmm. But then I came to realize actors need this information. And it was so exciting when I finally got a chance to write my first professional article, and people started writing me fan mail and hate mail all together. They were, and that's when I knew that even the people who were writing to me and telling me I had it wrong were telling me that what I was writing was worth writing. It did not feel like the kind of scholarship that so many of my peers have experienced, where you write a really good book and a few key people read it. I really want actors to read what I write as well as scholars.
That's fantastic. I think that shows in your work that you have those two sides married, and that you're continuing to work with actors is wonderful. And to me, it makes everything that much more immediate with it all.
Well, my work with actors is what tells me how to write. I don't think I could separate the two entirely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I do want to ask you today about Maria Knebel in particular, as somebody who your scholarship has informed and has brought to light in a way that I think people in America in particular and in other parts of Europe that haven't really been as familiar with her as I think that I have found. She's fascinating and her work is fascinating and somebody we really should know better. So can you tell us a little bit more about Maria?
Oh, absolutely. In an odd way, she has become my goddess of the theater. And I tell my students that because so much of what I practice in my workshops today comes from her. I first really learned about her after my work on Stanislavski had already begun, and I was in Paris for an international conference. It was some time ago. Stella Adler was at that conference, as was Bobby Lewis, as were so many people that we think of in terms of not only Stanislavski but the American method. And there were also a number of really prestigious people from Moscow. And one of them, who was then the hot kid director, but now is the seasoned master, Anatoly Vasilyev, was there, along with a woman named Natalia Zvereva, she still teaches at GITIS in Moscow. And when we were talking, they were the ones who first clued me in to the importance of Maria Knebel. They sent me to a book that I fell absolutely in love with. It was a book by Knebel called What Matters Most to Me. And it was a series of articles on her life, on the way she taught, on what she believed in the theater. And then I started looking, and I couldn't believe that there were 6 books that this woman had written, all about Stanislavski's last career, last experimental approach, his last studio, the Opera Dramatic, which is so hidden and so interesting and has so much still to be unpacked from it. And none of these things, not one of them at that point, was translated into English. There were translations into Spanish. And you can find her books in Spanish, but not in English. And so far, only one major article of hers has come out recently in English. So I began to see that she was, in my eyes, one of the most accurate, creative, articulate witnesses to what Stanislavski was doing when he was censored in his last 4 or 5 years of his life, when he was confined to his home, when everything he said and everything he wrote was passed through a censorship filter. She had taken his work underground. Maybe I should backtrack a little bit. I should say who she was. Let me start with that. She was born in 1898, the same year the Moscow Art Theater was founded. And she was short, not traditionally good looking. Her father had told her that she shouldn't be an actress because it would cause her nothing but pain. But so she determined to study mathematics. She had a really sharp mind until a student friend of hers took her to a hidden home studio opened by Michael Chekhov, when he had had his huge nervous breakdown. This was 1918. And so she was taken there, and he took her aside and said, "I want you to join my studio." And she said, "I can't. I've decided to study mathematics. My father doesn't think I'll find any roles." And he said, "You'll find character roles." So she pursued it. And by 1936, not only was she a working actor at the Moscow Art Theater, but she was also a very interesting director who was working in a lot of alternative venues in Moscow as a director with members of Meyerhold's company, his Theater of Revolution. She had hooked up with them because her husband at that time was a teacher of biomechanics. So she was in the perfect position to blend so much of what was going on in Russia at the time, and to be able to see Stanislavski as a tool for styles that were not always linked to the Moscow Art Theater, which was so embroiled and obligated in the 30s to deal with only realism. So in 1936, he called her into his home and he invited her to become a teacher in his opera dramatic studio, the last hidden studio that he was doing in his home, developing his new technique, which she later called active analysis. So actually, I've been spending a lot of time these last couple of weeks reading transcripts from those studios. There are 48 transcripts that were done of his classes. Most of them she attended. She has memories of some of them, so there are more. In some cases, there's more than one person's eyes on those studio classes. And I feel that the more and more I read of this period, the more and more her eyes are the eyes that take us to what he was thinking creatively. And her mind was the kind of mind that articulated more clearly some of what he was doing by naming it, teaching it, working with it. You know, in the late 30s, Stanislavski was writing his book, and it was the worst moment of Stalinism. The terror was going in the streets. People were disappearing. In fact, her husband, who was the Meyerhold company, disappeared in 1939, and she was called in, and she was told that she had to sign divorce papers with him.
Oh, wow.
And later she learned that he was in a camp in Siberia and had been released, but could no longer return to Moscow. So it was a dangerous time. It was an oppressive time. But she was there when he was working with his own integrity, experimenting, and being true to what he believed was the art that he loved. And she was there as witness. When he died, she took it underground. She would take people down into the basements of Gitas where she was teaching and teach trusted students about things that had been censored out of the system and out of the experiments at that time. And she held on tight. And then in the 1960s, when the thaw came, when Stalin was discredited, she started writing. And that's when she wrote these 6 books and 100 articles. Some of them were collected in the first book I read of hers. She died in 1986. So it's almost as if her entire professional career was confined by the Soviet government, because she started acting in 1918, right after the revolution, and she died in 1986 when things were thawing and she could talk. I think there's a certain amount, forgive me for the feminism, of gender politics and why we don't know about her. She talks about how very, very difficult it was to be a woman director in Russia. I link it oddly to women in Hollywood. I'm going to just make a really crazy leap here, because there was also another hidden history in acting history, when a lot of what Stanislavski was teaching in a very pure, non-method way was being taught in Hollywood by actors, all women, who had been brought to Hollywood from Broadway to create schools in the various studios. And those studios were hidden. And many of them directed films at that time by coaching the actors and working very closely with the camera, and wanted directing credit, but were denied it by Hollywood moguls. So many of them are uncredited on the films that they worked on, but they were absolutely essential to the training of actors through the 30s, 40s, 50s, until the studio system broke up. I feel like that group of women, in an odd way, experienced what Maria Knebel experienced in Russia, that making a name as a director as a woman has never been easy. And yet she was clearly the most influential director and teacher of directors in Moscow through to her death. Second thing about it is the whole process of translation, because there are 2 different translations available on Toporkov's book about the opera studio. And there's not one of hers. So there's a commercialism, a market, because her name is not known. So I suppose that now I'm also adding to my mission a sense of getting her to be known among the general population of actors, and moving some of the information about her forward. I was very proud of one of the articles in that book, Actor Training, because I think it's the first English article about her in, published. First English article about her published, and it was really fun to write.
It's been great to read as well. I was just so astonished and delighted when I read this, and just like, oh, so many things made more sense to me all of a sudden. And knowing a tiny bit about the way the current theater works in Russian, I was like, this seems like this whole other set of a lineage that makes sense to me, and kind of explains a lot of how their systems of training are divergent from ours. So thank you for publishing that, and I look forward to many more translations to come out about her. I know there's a couple that I've read everything out there, and there's not a whole lot.
No, there isn't, but there'll be more.
Yes.
There'll be more. And what I love about her is how articulate she is. But the son of her nephew, who actually lives in Boston, and who is a scientist, working in medical science. He has shared with me the sense of her as somebody who was tough, as well as smart, as well as creative. And I think what I see when I read her books in Russian is how she was able to write in such a way that she could deal with the censorship that was in front of her and still get the word out. It does make direct translation sometimes of her works a little tough because there are passages in it. And Vasiliev, the man that I met in Paris, the wonderful, amazing director, when I first heard about Knebel from him and Natalia Zvereva, he put a book out of her writings in French, you know. And what he did is he took two of her books and he sort of collated them and cut and edited. And I can understand why he did that, because there are places in her books that you know she's speaking to her own culture that would make it difficult for, say, an American actor working in a television show right now to know quite what to make of it. So, like so much of history, where we have these great acting teachers and great writers about acting speaking within their own times, we have to somehow be able to read that history for what we can take from it and apply to our own times as well. So that is one thing that I've struggled with as I've read her books. I think it's even something we struggle with when we struggle to translate complete and unabridged versions of Stanislavski, because there's a rhetoric of his time, of her time, that infuses into the books. If we think about anything written in the 19th century, we get a better flavor of what that might, an analogy for that maybe.
Right.
I'm just blathering here, but does it make
No,
sense?
absolutely. No, absolutely. It's I think that tends to be a problem that we noticed, and you talked about quite a bit how that affected Stanislavski's work and Stanislavski in Focus, and with Maria Knebel, I'm sure it has similar issues, that you need somebody who understands the art of acting, as well as Russia and Russian culture to marry all those things together to make it make sense for us today.
Right, and to take it across a border and break a border, cross a border in a way that doesn't do too much distortion or lose value. There's so many instances in history of the translation and transmission of great ideas changing and shape shifting over time, and it's very problematic when it comes to the Soviet era in particular.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Well, this has been really fascinating. Our time is unfortunately up. I think we could probably talk quite a bit more about this, and I'm sure we will later on. But it's been really, really lovely. Thank you so much. Hopefully other people will become excited about Maria Knebel and look up her work here in Actor Training, the chapter in that, as well as other published works. I know you have several articles out as well.
Right, and I would mention that you have the really beautiful first edition of Stanislavski in Focus. It's my favorite cover. There's another one out there with a less favorite cover, but that one has more. The second edition has a bit more about Maria Knebel in it.
Okay, I'll have to get that one. Yeah, I've had mine for a little while. I've been a fan for a while. So, but yeah, I'll have
No,
to get.
but I'm glad that's the one you held up because that's the cover I like.
Okay, good. Well, I'm sure the Deccan will be wonderful too, and I definitely have another thing for my list to get. So thank you so much, Sharon. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.